Welcome, friends. The Washington, D.C. United Lodge of Theosophists is closed due to coronavirus pandemic. We are working from home, and we have changed our program a little bit to accommodate this working from home. We follow the declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists, which states, "The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a true realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all." We're going to have the reading from the Bhagavad Gita, and then we'll have our program.
Today's reading comes from the Bhagavad Gita. "The universe, O Hrishikesha, is justly delighted with thy glory and is filled with zeal for thy service. The evil spirits are affrighted and flee on all sides, while all the hosts of saints bow down in adoration before thee. And wherefore should they not adore thee, O mighty being, thou who art greater than Brahma, who art the first maker? O eternal God of gods, O habitation of the universe, thou art the one indivisible being and non-being, that which is supreme. Thou art the first of gods, the most ancient spirit. Thou art the final supreme receptacle of this universe. Thou art the knower and that which is to be known, and the supreme mansion. And by thee, O thou of infinite form, is this universe caused to emanate. Thou art Vayu, god of wind, Agni, god of fire, Yama, god of death, Varuna, god of waters. Thou art the moon, Prajapati, the progenitor and grandfather art thou. Hail, hail to thee 1,000 times repeated. Again and again, hail to thee. Hail to thee, hail to thee from before, hail to thee from behind, hail to thee on all sides of the all. Infinite is thy power and might, thou includest all things, therefore thou art all things." Today's talk is on Alexandria and Her Schools. We'll have an introduction, and then we're going to read the conversation between Ammonius Saccas and Lysias. The little island of Samothrace in the Aegean Sea today, as you all know, is barren and sterile. But at one time, it was the home of great adepts and the site of the oldest mysteries known to Western history. These mysteries originated in the night of time, thousands and thousands years before the historical period. In them was taught by dramatic representation the whole story of cosmic evolution. Physical science, medicine, and the laws of music were taught in the same manner. The nature of the human spirit, its relation to the body, and the method by which we could purify and restore it to its rightful position as sovereign lord of the body were explained to the candidates who were ready for initiation, and it was incorporated into the philosophical and ethical doctrines. The mysteries, therefore, were highly religious, scientific, and philosophical in their nature, but at the same time, it was beneficent as a school of ethics. About 400 years before the Christian era, the mysteries had already begun to decay. Materialistic ideas were slowly creeping in and undermining the spiritual teachings. Priestly speculations were being substituted for the real Gnosis, and the Adepts that were in charge of these mystery schools, because they were the heads of the mystery schools, were gradually withdrawing into the more remote parts of the earth. The death knell of the mystery school of Samothrace, it is also called Samos today, was first sounded by the karma of a young novice whose name was Olympias. She was the orphan daughter of the late king Neoptolemus. She was mystic by nature and was a special devotee of Zeus Ammon, the Egyptian Greek representation of the ever-concealed deity, whose garment was ether, the luminous substance which pervades the entire universe. And in the secret doctrine, of course, it is called the Akasha. In the year 357 BC, Philip, the young king of Macedonia, paid a visit to the island of Samothrace, then only a day's sail from the mainland he came from. Whether this visit was prompted by some mystical strain in Philip's blood, or whether it had been necessary by a vow that he had taken in his youth, which of course necessitated his return to the island. At any rate, this visit sealed his own fate and also the fate of the world for many centuries. There, on Samothrace, he met Olympias, who became his wife, and of course, she became the mother of Alexander the Great. The legend runs that on the night before her wedding, Olympias dreamt, and in her dream, she dreamt that a thunderbolt had entered her sight, and that the god Ammon, under the guise of a serpent, had become the father of her child. During his whole life, and for centuries after his death, Alexander was considered as the son of Ammon. He accepted the fact of his divine paternity and dreamed, even as a youth, of the day when he would be able to visit the shrine of his father Ammon in the Siwa oasis in Egypt. It was this desire rather than the political ambition with which he is generally credited that eventually took him to Alexandria in Egypt. And to this visit, we owe the Alexandrian existence in Egypt. The site that he chose for his city was situated on a long ribbon of land which was in between the Mediterranean and on the north and Lake Myriotis on the south. To the east lay the great delta of the Nile, and to the west the vast yellow desert where his father Ammon lay enshrined. In the year 331 BC, he marked out the original walls of the city, and the tracing was done with flour that his veterans had carried with them from Macedonia. He planned the city in the shape of a cross that had an intersection of two grand boulevards. As we know, he was cut off from doing this project with his early death. So the task of doing it was left to his half-brother Ptolemy Soter, who, with the aid of his son Ptolemy Philadelphus, completed the work. At that time, Alexander's dream city had become a living reality. It was now a giant cross of Calvary, its four natural divisions housing some of the greatest intellects in the world. In future centuries, of course, it was destined to become a cross of Calvary in reality, upon which the wisdom religion was to be crucified, and the last exponent of that wisdom religion, who was the immortal Hypatia, of course, was torn limb from limb by the Christian mob. The city of Alexandria is interesting, especially to those of us who are in the Theosophical circles, for there, just 1500 years ago, existed the last great Theosophical school in history, the school which was begun by Ammonius Saccas and ended with the death of Hypatia. So, considering the 1500-year cycle of reincarnation, it becomes possible that many Theosophists of today, the present day, perhaps were members of that older school. And it is not difficult for many to see in imagination the city of Alexandria that existed in 193 AD, which is the year in which Ammonius Saccas founded that mystery school. Then let us try to turn back the centuries, and we can visit together this very ancient metropolis. There we may envision together a scene, perhaps that will make the environment vivid for that time and for the life of Ammonius Saccas. So in this conversation, Ammonius is going to be read by the female presenter, and Lysias is going to be the male presenter. So Ammonius is going to the docks to meet Lysias, who is a young Greek student coming from Athens on that day. As he steps from the ship, Ammonius goes to him and welcomes the Greek with open arms. And he greets Lysias, saying, "My friend and future pupil, I am glad to see thee, and how grateful for your help. We will need all the strength we can procure for our future work, and thy clear eyes tell me that thou at least seest the seriousness of this our undertaking."
I do, Ammonius, and already thy city interests me. What a babel of tongues on these docks, and sailors from every land on earth.
Thou hast chosen an interesting place to make thy entry into our city, friend Lysias, perhaps the harbor of happy return, through which thy ship came to this place of anchor, and may have an inner meaning for you. Perhaps thou, my friend, art one of the old workers in this cause, and thine entry into the city of Alexandria marks a happy return to work already started in other lives. So then we can take that simile and apply it to ourselves. Look well at these docks before we leave them. Here I worked as a corn porter when I was but a lad, because his family was poor and Ammonius was helping feed the family from a very young age. Now people call me Ammonius Saccus, or Ammonius the sack carrier. These docks are in the Egyptian quarter of the city, that quarter which is known as Rakotis. Come, let us hasten from this noisy place, and there are many interesting things that I would show thee.
And so Ammonius and Lysias crossed the Egyptian quarter of the city, soon ascending the rocky hill to the south, upon which is built the great Serapeum. It consists of a vast group of buildings centered around the great temple of Serapis. The Egyptian architecture of the palace interests the young Athenian, for it is quite different from the Greek style to which he is accustomed. It is a great fort-like place, gloomy and severe, which they approach by a long flight of steps bordered with innumerable sphinxes. So Lysias said, "What a magnificent place, Ammonius! The capital at Athens does not surpass it in grandeur. May we enter the temple?"
The temple is that of Serapis, and in other writings it is stated that the figure of Serapis was at the entrance of that temple. Ammonius answers Lysias by saying that they may go into it, and as we go through, I will tell thee something of a countryman of thine, Apollonius of Tyana, who taught in this temple a little over 100 years ago. As we know, Apollonius of Tyana was on the scene in the 1st century AD. It was here that the Emperor Vespasian first met him. On the day that Vespasian arrived in Alexandria, the whole city came down to the docks to greet him. He looked in vain for a sight of Apollonius, but Damis informed him that Apollonius was busy teaching in the temple. Vespasian, brushing aside those who had come to pay him honor on the docks, hastened to the temple, and after a short conversation with Apollonius, made him his friend and counselor.
Has Apollonius' work prospered in Egypt, Ammonius? I hear from Rome that Justin is trying to belittle it.
That is true. The Christians are making a sad mistake by claiming that their religion is unique when all the world knows otherwise. And here this statement shows us that at the beginning of the centuries of our historical era, this fact was known to all those who were familiar with the philosophy of the time. Here in Alexandria, Basilides and Valentinus have been working for years trying to prove that Jesus' teachings are but restatements of the ancient doctrines. But as thou knowest, their work is being undermined by Justin and Irenaeus, who seem to have forgotten that Jesus himself was a student of the ancient Gnostic doctrines, and that his purpose, therefore, was to bring them to light again. Why do not the Christians realize that all religions have sprung from a common source? That is our work, friend Lysias, and we will need all the help thou canst render.
By this time, the two friends have descended the hill of the Serapion and are walking along the great street of Canopus. The young Greek is astonished at the cosmopolitan character of the city. He sees many of his own countrymen, haughty and supercilious in their manner. Roman magistrates and military men greet one another, and Roman legionnaires are busily patrolling the streets. They see a few Persians in the crowd, and some golden brown people from far off India. They see black Ethiopians, and many sun-brown Arabs and native Egyptians. A procession of nuns passes. These belong to the temple of Ceres. Keep your eyes on the ground, the white-robed priestesses cry. They pass a group of Athenians and stop for a moment to greet an elderly man whose calm, peaceful gaze rests quietly upon the young Greek.
I suggest you read this again from up here. This is Essenes. So please go to a procession of nuns.
They see black Ethiopians and many sun-browned Arabs and native Egyptians. A procession of nuns passes. These belong to the temple of Ceres. Keep your eyes on the ground, the white-robed priestesses cry. They pass a group of Essenes and stop for a moment to greet an elderly man whose calm, peaceful gaze rests quietly upon the young Greek. And Lysias says, there are so many Jews in this city, Ammonius. One sees not so many in Rome and Athens together.
The Jews have always been welcome in Alexandria, my son. Thousands of them were invited to settle here by the first two Ptolemies. There is a great college of rabbis in the city, and on the hills to the south there dwells a group of esotericists known as the Therapeutae. The man I just greeted belongs to that order.
Dost thou expect any help from the Jews, Ammonius?
Indeed would do, friend Lysias. There are many Jews who have already helped pave the way for our work. Dost know what Aristobulus did? Over 200 years ago, he showed the relationship between the ethics of Aristotle and the laws of Moses. Dost thou know that great book, The Wisdom of Solomon? Here another attempt was made to reconcile the philosophy of Plato with the Hebrew scriptures. Surely thou knowest the work of Philo Judaeus, who sought to reconcile the Pentateuch with the Platonic and Pythagorean philosophy. And only last century, Josephus, the friend of Vespasian, tried to prove that the Essenes of Carmel were identical with our own Therapeutae. The work done by these eminent Jews was and is important, but it is not enough. Our task is to prove the common source of all religions. To do that, we must go back, as Apollonius did, to the ancient East.
Look yonder, Ammonius. Why are those men screaming in such a fashion?
That, my friend, is the temple of Neptune, now used as a corn exchange. Those men who are screaming so boisterously are the speculators. Perhaps the price of corn has gone up today.
I see that Alexandria is not completely absorbed by philosophy, Ammonius.
By no means, friend Lysias. Alexandria is a pleasure-loving city, passionately fond of the theater and the horse races. Come, we are already at the eastern gate. Let us pass through, and I will show thee the hippodrome and some of the gay restaurants of Eleusis.
And so they passed through the gate into the sun-baked plain where rich and fashionable Alexandria seeks its pleasures. The air is filled with the sound of rollicking songs, bits of venomous gossip, and frivolous talk.
This is one side of Alexandria, friend Lysias. Hearest thou those silly songs? Every time a statesman comes to office, or a new emperor ascends the throne, the young wags of the city give him a nickname and immortalize it in a popular song that they compose. Thou must have heard them even in Athens, for such things travel fast. But come, let us not waste our time here. It is not from this class of people that our school withdraw its students. Let us go back into the museum gardens, and I will tell thee the history of that famous place.
Wending their way back through the street of Canopus, the two friends finally reach the great square where the two broad avenues intersect. Taking the street leading to the right, they find themselves in the aristocratic quarter of the city. The young Athenian is amazed at the beauty of the royal palace, from which a broad flight of steps leads down to the clear azure waters below. The palace gardens are colorful echoes of Greece, filled with the same daisies, poppies, iris, and asphodel that bloom upon the hills around Athens. Overlooking the harbor stands a magnificent series of buildings. There the theater, whose highest seats afford a view of the island of Antirodes and the great galleys riding upon the blue waters in the shadow of the lighthouse of Pharos. In the center of the square are the tombs of the Ptolemies, grouped around the mausoleum of Alexander the Great. On the other side of the street of Canopus is the temple of Pan, and beyond that the gymnasium with its long porticos. But the building which interests the young Greek most of all is the great museum, which had been for hundreds of years the cultural center of the world.
Let us seat ourselves in the garden, Lysias, and I will tell thee something of the history of this place. The first museum was commenced by Ptolemy I and finished by his son Ptolemy Philadelphus. The first Ptolemy, like his half-brother Alexander the Great, had been a pupil of Aristotle and was determined to continue the work begun by his master. He found the museum with three objects in view. First, he intended to collect the great literature of every country in the world for the museum library, which was called the Brachion. Next, he determined to increase the store of existing knowledge through the efforts of Greek scholars. Finally, he resolved to diffuse that knowledge as widely as possible. His intention was to make Alexandria the most important cultural center in the world and to draw to it all the foremost thinkers of the day. orders were given to purchase at the king's expense all the manuscripts that could be found in every land. Letters were sent to all the reigning sovereigns at that time, begging for the original works of their poets, scientists, historians, logicians, and philosophers. And every captain who entered the port of Alexandria was commissioned to bring them back. In this way, Alexandria became the owner of some of the most ancient Greek manuscripts. The works of Homer, Hesiod, Plato, and Pythagoras, of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aristotle's own library was soon resting in the break-in. But Greece was not the only country called upon to feed the museum. Many manuscripts were brought from India and Persia, and some rare Chaldean works found their way into the break-in. The second Ptolemy procured a copy of the Pentateuch, and the Greek translation of that work, known as the Septuagint, dates from that period. But the collecting of manuscript was only part of Ptolemy's work. He maintained an army of scholars at the museum, whose time was spent in studying and translating these ancient texts into Greek. And in addition to these, the museum supported a staff of lecturers, whose classes were filled with the students from every part of the world. The break-in at one time contained so many scrolls that it became necessary to establish another library in the Serapeum, which we visited today. In those days, the break-in contained 400,000 volumes and the Serapeum 300,000. But later, the break-in itself housed at least 700,000 scrolls.
May we enter the library, Ammonius? I fain would see those ancient scrolls.
Alas, my friend, that thou canst not do. For the great library of the break-in came to an end in the days of Cleopatra. When Caesar's fleet was burning in the harbor, the museum caught fire and the break-in was destroyed. But fortunately, the priceless manuscripts were not entirely lost, for at that time the break-in was undergoing repairs, and one of the librarians had taken a number of the most precious rolls to his own home, where they were safely stored away. Many of the other rolls were rescued by the librarians, aided by a number of slaves attached to the museum. Fortunately, one of the scribes in the museum, a youth named Theosophists, wrote out all the details of the rescue, and someday the scrolls may come to light again.
Tell me something about the great schools of Alexandria, Ammonius. Even Rome and Athens are jealous of their supremacy.
Thou wilt remember my telling thee that Ptolemy I was a pupil of Aristotle. The first school was founded to carry on the Aristotelian tradition. In that school, the inductive method was used, which starts with particulars and rises to the universals. In that way, it was directly opposed to the method used by Plato, who started with universals and descended into particulars. And here we will interject that Plato was an initiate, but his student Aristotle was not. And he truly did not understand the philosophy and hence started his own way of looking at things. And of course, this is the methodology used in science to our detriment today. This first school was also famous as an institute of science. It was there under Ptolemy I that Euclid founded his famous mathematical school and wrote his monumental works on geometry. It was there that Archimedes laid his foundation for hydrostatics, discovered the theory of the lever, and invented the Archimedean screw for raising the water of the Nile. The old scientists of Alexandria had correct ideas concerning the sphericity of the Earth, its poles, axis, equator, Arctic and Antarctic circles. Ptolemy himself was the author of a great mathematical work and it was titled Syntaxis. In that school, Theosophists invented a fire engine, and his pupil Hero a steam engine. Water clocks were used in the Serapeum, and Julius Caesar called on one of our Alexandrian astronomers, Sosigenes, to help him formulate the Julian calendar. There were botanical and zoological gardens attached to the museum, as well as great chemical laboratory.
Thou hast spoken of the ancient scientist knowing of the sphericity of the earth. Dost know that the Christians are now teaching that the earth is flat?
So have I heard. And I have just received news that Tertullian at this very minute is condemning all our old philosophers to the eternal fire of the Christian hell. But I have not entirely given up hope among the Christians. At this very moment, there is an extraordinary young man who is the head of the catechetical school here in Alexandria. He is deeply interested in the philosophy of Plato, and his name is Clement of Alexandria. Ah, there he is at this very moment. Greetings, Clement. I was just speaking of thee to our young friend who has only this morning arrived from Athens.
Clement says, Greetings to thee, Athenian. Hast thou come to our city to sit at the feet of Ammonius? Methinks he has something of value to offer thee. I wish that I, like thee, could spend all my time with him. But alas, I am a Christian priest and dare not go too far afield of my search for knowledge.
Ah, Clement, my friend, thou hast already jeopardized thy safety. Take care that thou art not excommunicated for thy philosophical learnings.
The trouble with me, friend Ammonius, is that I can find no beginning to the long line of teachers which even thou admittest exist. Every science and philosophy must have had his teachers, and each teacher in his turn must have had his teacher. Where did it all begin?
Thy trouble, Clement, is in trying to find two lines of teachers, one connected with Christianity and the other with the old philosophies. We Theosophists have no such difficulty. We know who the masters of wisdom were and are. Beware, Clement, before it is too late, and thou art lost both to Christianity as well as to us. But come, Lysias, the sun is getting low. We cannot tarry longer.
Lysias, thou hast spoken, Ammonius, of the philosophical and scientific schools of thy great city. Has nothing been done along moral and ethical lines during the last 4 centuries?
Much. Thou knowest the school that Zeno founded in thine own city at Athens 400 years ago. We have a school of Stoics in Alexandria at this time as well. Their philosophy is a practical one, directed to the living of everyday life. Their founder Zeno had many things in common with Aristotle, but the Stoics have definite statements concerning the 3 fundamental propositions, which, as thou knowest, underlie all true systems of philosophy. They acknowledge the presence of an invisible principle or divine energy which permeates all nature and of which matter is but the passive agent. They do not acknowledge the idea of chance, but claim that everything is the effect of some unknown cause. They consider the soul of man as a spark of the vital principle, which the ignorant call God. Of course, this is exactly the same thing as today. At death, they say the soul is not annihilated, but is merely absorbed into its original essence. Therefore, they do not fear death and show complete indifference toward pleasure and pain. They are materialists, if thou likest, but they are great men like Seneca Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius gave out moral precepts which any man could follow with good results. And we can do the same thing today. I think we need to look at these great old philosophers and see what they have said in their philosophical discussions about life in general, because they do have practical suggestions for ethical living.
Absolutely, like his response. And out of these different schools, Ammonius, what wilt thou draw for thine own?
We will extract the truth from all of them and discard whatever is false. We will be known as Philaletheans, or lovers of truth, and for us there will be no religion higher than truth. We will not confine our study to the philosophies of Greece alone, but will draw upon every race, every country, every period of history for their spiritual, intellectual, and moral contribution. In studying the different philosophies, we will use the method of analogy and correspondence and try to understand the meaning of every ancient symbol. Our work will not be a continuation of the Aristotelian system. It will be based upon the ideals of Plato, and will be a resuscitation of the work of Pot Amun, the Egyptian priest who lived under the early Ptolemies and who taught the outlines of the secret wisdom religion to the uninitiated. Our philosophy will be based upon the same wisdom religion and will be known as Theosophia, the wisdom of the gods. And the discussion ends here. As we all know, this same system exists in the secret doctrine. It has been drawn from all great philosophies of the old. It is based on analogy and correspondence, and it requires continuous effort for its understanding. And it does not release its information very easily, but if we assume that it will in time and continue the work, it truly does in time give us indications as to in which way we're supposed to go. There is no discussion at the end of this presentation. So if you have any questions, please submit them online and we will try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to add that today's motto in Theosophy is there is no religion higher than truth. And thank you for joining us.